Scary telling.
I couldn't believe it when I found out I was pregnant. Zane and I had been trying for months, and it seemed like it would never happen. But when the test came back positive, I was over the moon. I couldn't wait to share the news with my mother-in-law and start planning for our future as a family. I made plans to visit Zane's parents' house to tell them the good news. As I pulled up to the house, I felt a wave of excitement wash over me. I couldn't wait to see their reactions and share in their joy. When I walked into the house, I immediately sensed that something was off. My father-in-law, Sam, was sitting in the living room, staring blankly at the TV. He barely registered my presence as I walked past him to find my mother-in-law, who was in the kitchen. "Mom, I have some news," I said, unable to contain my excitement any longer. She turned to me, a smile spreading across her face. "What is it, dear?" "I'm pregnant," I exclaimed, holding up the pregnancy test. She let out a small gasp and wrapped me in a hug. "Oh, Sarah, that's wonderful news. Congratulations." But as we sat down to talk, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Sam was acting strange, and it seemed like he wasn't really present in the moment. I tried to brush it off and focus on the excitement of the day, but the unease lingered in the back of my mind. After a while, I decided to head back home. As I hugged my mother-in-law goodbye, I couldn't help but feel a little disappointed that Sam hadn't shared in our excitement. But I told myself that maybe he was just having an off day and that everything would be fine. As I drove home, I couldn't stop thinking about the strange feeling I had while I was at their house. It was like there was something lurking beneath the surface, something that I couldn't quite put my finger on. But I pushed those thoughts aside and focused on the excitement of starting a family with Zane. I couldn't wait to share the news with our friends and family and start planning for our future together. As the weeks went by, I started to notice more and more strange behavior from Sam. Every time we went to visit, he seemed to be more withdrawn, spending most of his time in his study or outside in the backyard. I tried to talk to Zane about it, but he didn't seem to think it was a big deal. He brushed it off, saying that his father had always been a little eccentric and that he probably just needed some time to himself. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Every time we left their house, I felt like there was a weight on my chest, like I was leaving something important behind. One day, while Zane was at work, I decided to go over to his parents' house to see if I could figure out what was going on with Sam. I knocked on the door and waited for a moment before Sam answered. "Hi, Sam," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "Is everything okay?" He looked up at me with a blank expression before nodding and stepping aside to let me in. The house was eerily quiet, and I could hear the ticking of a clock somewhere in the background. I walked into the living room and saw that Sam was sitting in his usual spot, staring at the TV with a vacant expression. "Sam, is everything okay?" I asked, walking over to him. He didn't respond, and I could see that he was shaking slightly. I felt a pang of concern and sat down next to him, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. "Sam, please talk to me. Is there something wrong?" He finally looked up at me, his eyes clouded with sadness. "I just can't do it anymore, Sarah. It's all too much." "What do you mean? What can't he do anymore?" But he didn't answer. He just sat there, shaking, lost in his own thoughts. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to help him, but I didn't know how. I sat with him for a while, just holding his hand and trying to offer him some comfort. Eventually, I had to leave to pick up Zane from work. As I got up to go, Sam looked up at me with tears in his eyes. "Please, Sarah, don't leave me alone," he whispered. I promised him that I wouldn't and left the house feeling more confused and concerned than ever before. I knew that something was seriously wrong with Sam, but I didn't know how to help him. After my visit with Sam, I knew that I had to do something to help him. I tried talking to Zane again, but he was still in denial about his father's behavior. He didn't want to believe that anything was wrong, and he refused to acknowledge the signs of addiction that were becoming more and more obvious. But I couldn't just sit back and do nothing. I started doing my own research and reading about the signs of addiction. I found empty pill bottles hidden around the house, and I could hear Sam whispering to himself in the middle of the night. I knew that things were getting worse, and I had to act fast. One night, while Zane was at work, I decided to go over to his parents' house again. I had to see for myself what was going on and confront Sam about his addiction. I walked into the living room and saw Sam sitting on the couch, surrounded by drug paraphernalia. He was muttering to himself and shaking uncontrollably. I felt sick to my stomach as I realized just how bad things had gotten. "Sam, we need to talk," I said, walking over to him. He looked up at me, his eyes bloodshot and glazed over. "What do you want, Sarah?" "I want to help you. I know what's going on, and I'm not going to let you go through this alone." He looked at me for a moment before breaking down into tears. "I can't stop, Sarah. I need it. I need it to feel normal." I sat with him for hours, just talking and trying to offer him some comfort. I knew that I couldn't fix things overnight, but I was determined to do whatever it took to get him the help he needed. The next day, I talked to Zane and convinced him to get his father into rehab. It wasn't easy, but I knew that it was the right thing to do. Watching Sam go through withdrawal and rehab was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. He was angry and resistant at first, but eventually he started to open up and accept the help that was being offered to him. It was a long and difficult road, but eventually Sam was able to get clean and start rebuilding his life. It wasn't easy, but I was proud of him for taking the steps to overcome his addiction. The experience left me shaken and more aware of the dangers of addiction. I knew that it could happen to anyone, and that we all need to be vigilant and supportive of those who are struggling. It wasn't an easy journey, but I was glad that I was able to be there for Sam when he needed me the most. After Sam's stint in rehab, things seemed to be getting back to normal. He was more present in our lives, and we all breathed a sigh of relief that the worst was over. But the nightmare was far from over, and it wasn't long before I realized just how deep Sam's addiction had run. One night, I woke up to find Sam standing over me, his eyes glazed over and his face twisted in a grotesque expression. I screamed and ran out of the house, calling Zane as I went. When Zane arrived, he found me sitting on the curb outside the house, shaking and crying. I told him what had happened, and he immediately went inside to talk to his father. I stayed outside, trying to calm down and process what had just happened. It felt like a nightmare, like I was trapped in a horror movie and couldn't escape. After a while, Zane came back outside, looking pale and shaken. He told me that his father had relapsed and that things were worse than ever. I felt sick to my stomach, knowing that we were right back where we had started. Zane and I talked for hours, trying to figure out what to do next. We both knew that we couldn't keep going on like this, that something needed to change if we were going to help Sam. Eventually, we decided to try to get him into a support group and get him the professional help that he needed. It wasn't an easy decision, but we knew that it was the only way forward. Over the next few weeks, Zane and I attended support group meetings with Sam, trying to offer him as much support as possible. It was a difficult process, and there were many setbacks along the way. But eventually, Sam started to make progress. He began to open up and talk about his addiction, and he started to work on rebuilding his relationships with us. It wasn't an easy journey, but it was a necessary one. Watching someone you love struggle with addiction is one of the hardest things you can go through, but I knew that we had to stick by Sam's side and offer him as much support as possible. Years later, I still have nightmares about that night. But I'm grateful that we were able to help Sam get the professional help that he needed and start to rebuild his life. Addiction is a difficult journey, but it's one that no one should have to face alone. Just when things seemed to be getting better, everything came crashing down around us. It started with a note that I found in my drawer one morning, a note from Zane that shattered my world. As I read the note, tears streaming down my face, I felt like I was living in a nightmare. Zane was leaving me, leaving our life together, leaving everything we had built for a new family with someone else. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't comprehend what was happening. I confronted Zane about the note, but he was unrepentant. He told me that he had to move on, that he couldn't keep living with the lies and secrets that had been tearing our family apart. I was devastated, and I didn't know what to do. I felt like I had been living in a fantasy world, one where everything was perfect and nothing could go wrong. But the reality was far from perfect, and I had been blind to it all. As the weeks went by, I watched as Zane started a new life with his new family. I felt like a ghost, like I was living in a world that wasn't my own. But things took a darker turn when I found out that Zane had been hiding a secret from me, a secret that he had been keeping for years. It was a betrayal that shook me to my core and made me question everything I thought I knew about the man I had married. I won't go into the details of what he did, but it was a betrayal that was both shocking and devastating. I felt like I had been living in a nightmare, one where nothing was as it seemed and everything was a lie. In the end, I had to make the difficult decision to cut ties with Zane and his new family. It was a painful decision, but I knew that I couldn't keep living in a world of lies and deceit. Looking back on those years, I still feel a sense of grief and loss. But I also know that I was able to find the strength to rebuild my life and move on from the pain and heartache of the past. Betrayal is a difficult thing to overcome, but it's also an opportunity to learn and grow. It's a reminder that life is unpredictable and that we never know what's waiting around the corner. But it's also a reminder that we are stronger than we think and that we have the power to overcome even the darkest of moments.